The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been Marcus Chen's home for 3 years, but it had never felt quite right. The red-orange sky always seemed angry, and the twin suns cast everything in a perpetual sunset glow that made him homesick for Earth's familiar blue. Still, the pay was good, and someone had to extract the rare Earth minerals that kept humanity's expanding fleet running. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he guided the massive extraction drill through another vein of trilithium ore. The work was hard, dangerous, and mind-numbing, but it beat the alternatives back home. At 28, he'd already seen enough corporate wars and economic collapse to know that frontier mining was his best shot at a decent life. The proximity alarm on his suit suddenly screamed to life. Marcus looked up from his controls to see something that shouldn't exist, a sleek, crystalline ship descending through the atmosphere at impossible speeds. It was unlike anything in the human fleet databases, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. "Control, this is Chun at Extraction Site 7, he radioed. "I've got an unknown contact coming in fast. Looks like first contact situation." Static answered him. Then more static. The ship's electromagnetic field was probably scrambling all communications in a 50-kilometer radius. The alien vessel touched down with surprising gentleness about 200 meters from his position, sending up clouds of the planet's iron-rich dust. For several minutes, nothing happened. Marcus kept his hands near the emergency beacon, though he doubted it would punch through the interference. Then, the ship's hull began to shimmer and fold in ways that hurt to look at directly. A section that had appeared solid moments before simply wasn't there anymore, revealing an opening. 3 figures emerged, moving with fluid grace despite wearing what appeared to be environmental suits. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with builds that suggested both strength and speed. Their suits were form-fitting and seemed to be made of the same light-bending material as their ship. But it was their movements that caught Marcus's attention. Too smooth, too coordinated. These weren't just advanced aliens. They were clearly apex predators from whatever world had spawned them. The lead figure raised one hand, and Marcus felt his mind suddenly filled with images and concepts that weren't his own. Communication through direct neural interface, something human science had theorized but never achieved. "Greetings, mineral gatherer. We are Zephyrians of the 3rd Spiral Dominion. We require assistance." The mental voice was distinctly feminine, with undertones of urgency and barely controlled fear. Marcus found himself responding instinctively, not through his radio, but by focusing his thoughts. "I'm Marcus Chun, human. What kind of assistance? Our vessel carries Princess Lyralii, heir to the Zephyrian throne. She is gravely injured. We detected your species' medical broadcasts and hoped your people might possess the healing knowledge we lack." Images flooded Marcus's mind. A being of ethereal beauty lying motionless in what appeared to be a medical bay, her skin pale and flickering with strange patterns of light. Whatever had happened to her was clearly beyond Zephyrian medicine. "I'm just a miner," Marcus projected back. "But there's a full medical facility at the main colony. It's about 60 kilometers from here. I can guide you there." The lead Zephyrian's relief was palpable through the neural link. "We will be grateful. Our navigation systems are unfamiliar with this world's magnetic patterns." Marcus shut down his equipment and climbed into the passenger compartment of his mining rover. It wasn't built for speed, but it was reliable and could handle the rough terrain between the extraction sites and the colony. As he started the engine, the Zephyrians boarded their vessel and began following his lead. The journey should have taken 90 minutes. They made it 40 minutes before everything went wrong. The attack came from the planet's terminator line, where eternal twilight provided perfect cover for ambush. Marcus first noticed the danger when his rover's threat detection system began shrieking warnings about incoming energy signatures. 3 ships rose from behind a line of low hills, definitely not human, but clearly different from the Zephyrians. These vessels were angular, aggressive, all sharp edges and weapon emplacements. They moved with predatory intent, positioning themselves to cut off any escape route. Korthak War Clan, came the princess's voice directly into Marcus's mind, weaker than her escorts, but still clear. They seek to prevent the peace treaty between our peoples and the Andorian Federation. They must not capture me. The lead Zephyrian ship immediately began evasive maneuvers, but Marcus could see they were outgunned. The Korthak vessels were larger, more heavily armed, and there were 3 of them. Worse, the Zephyrian ship was clearly not designed for combat. It was an elegant diplomatic vessel caught in a military situation. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of fleeing to safety, he wheeled his mining rover around and headed directly toward the battle. His vehicle wasn't armed, but it was equipped with industrial-grade tools that might serve as weapons in desperate circumstances. More importantly, it was built to survive in the harsh conditions of a mining world. The first Korthak ship noticed his approach and turned its weapons toward him. Energy beams lanced out, turning the ground around his rover into glass. Marcus yanked the controls hard left, using every trick he'd learned in 3 years of navigating treacherous terrain. "Human, what are you doing?" The mental voice belonged to the lead Zephyrian escort. "Save yourself. This is not your battle." "Like hell it isn't," Marcus shot back. "You came here for help. That makes it my problem." He activated his rover's mining laser, designed to cut through solid rock, but never tested against starship armor. The beam struck the nearest Korthak vessel just as it was lining up another shot at the princess's ship. To Marcus's surprise, the laser actually penetrated their hull plating, causing systems to spark and fail. The Korthak ship spun toward him, clearly viewing him as a legitimate threat now. Marcus found himself staring down weapon batteries that could vaporize his rover in an instant. That's when the Zephyrian princess made her own desperate decision. Her ship suddenly accelerated directly toward the largest Korthak vessel, clearly intending to ram it. The move was suicidal. Her elegant diplomatic ship couldn't possibly survive a collision with a military-grade hull. Marcus saw what was about to happen and made his choice. He gunned his rover's engine, pushing it far beyond safe operational limits, and intercepted the princess's ship just before impact. The collision was catastrophic. Marcus felt his rover's reinforced cabin crumple around him as the Zephyrian vessel struck his vehicle instead of the Korthak ship. The princess's ship, its momentum redirected by the impact, spun away from the enemy vessels in a trajectory that would take it behind a line of protective ridges. The rover exploded in a ball of superheated metal and industrial chemicals. Marcus felt the world spin wildly around him as he was thrown clear of the wreckage. He hit the ground hard, rolled for what felt like forever, and came to rest against an outcropping of crystalline rock. Pain hit him like a physical blow. Looking down, he saw why. Both of his arms were gone, not cut off cleanly, torn away by the force of the explosion, leaving ragged stumps that ended just below his shoulders. The biomedical systems in his mining suit were already flooding his bloodstream with emergency trauma drugs. But Marcus knew he had only minutes before blood loss claimed him. The Korthak ships were landing, their crews deploying to search for survivors. Marcus could hear the whine of their energy weapons powering up, preparing to finish what the battle had started. But the princess's ship was safely hidden behind the ridge, and her escorts were already moving to extract her. The peace treaty would survive, even if he didn't. Marcus Chun closed his eyes and waited for the darkness to take him. He'd done what needed doing. Sometimes that was enough. Except the darkness that came wasn't the peaceful oblivion of death. It was something else entirely. Marcus felt himself falling through layers of reality, past the physical world and into something deeper. Strange energies played across his consciousness, ancient, powerful, and utterly alien. He sensed vast intelligences watching him, evaluating him, weighing his actions against standards he couldn't comprehend. This one acted with honor. Came a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of space itself. This one chose sacrifice over survival. This one protected the innocent despite great cost. But he is broken, replied another voice, this one carrying the weight of eons. His form cannot sustain life much longer. Then we shall remake him, declared a third presence, and this voice carried the authority of stars being born. The dragons of old understood duty. We shall grant him their strength. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding, his perspective shifting in ways that human language couldn't describe. He sensed the universe as the ancients had seen it, a vast web of interconnected energy patterns, where will and intention could reshape reality itself. Power flowed through him, rewriting his cellular structure at the most fundamental level. Where his arms had been torn away, something new began to grow. Not human flesh, but something far stronger, scales that gleamed like polished obsidian, claws that could rend starship armor, muscles that could crush stone. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined. Marcus felt his human limitations being stripped away and replaced with something magnificent and terrible. His senses expanded beyond normal human ranges. His physical strength increased by orders of magnitude. His mind touched powers that had been lost to the galaxy for millions of years. But perhaps most importantly, he retained his essential humanity, his compassion, his determination to protect others, his willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The ancient powers had chosen well. When Marcus opened his eyes, the Korthak search teams had found his body. They were standing over him, energy weapons aimed at his chest, preparing to confirm the kill. They weren't prepared for what they found instead. Marcus Chun rose from the crystalline sand, no longer quite human, but still fundamentally himself. Where his arms had been, dragon claws now extended, each one longer than a sword, harder than diamond, and crackling with energies that made the air itself shimmer. The lead Korthak warrior took a step backward, his weapon wavering. These were beings who had conquered a dozen worlds, but they'd never seen anything like what stood before them. Marcus flexed his new appendages, marveling at the power that flowed through them. He could sense every energy pattern around him. The Korthak weapons, their ship's power systems, even the distant hum of the princess's hidden vessel. You wanted to fight, Marcus said, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the planetary bedrock itself. Let's see how you handle a real opponent. The Korthak opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams that could melt through armor plating struck Marcus directly in the chest. The attacks didn't even slow him down. Marcus moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible, crossing the distance to the enemy soldiers before their weapons could recycle. His claws swept through their armor as if it were paper, sending them sprawling across the sand. But he didn't kill them. Despite their attempts to murder him and the princess, Marcus found himself pulling back at the last second. These beings were following orders, caught up in political conflicts they might not fully understand. Instead, he disabled their weapons and their communication systems, leaving them stranded but alive. Let them walk home and tell their commanders what they'd encountered. Maybe next time they'd think twice before attacking diplomatic vessels. The Korthak ships in orbit detected what was happening on the surface and began powering their main batteries. Marcus looked up at the three vessels hovering above and smiled, an expression that would have been terrifying if anyone had been watching. He crouched down, feeling new muscles bunch and coil in his transformed legs. Then he leaped. The jump carried him nearly a kilometer straight up, his trajectory taking him directly toward the nearest enemy ship. As he flew through the thin atmosphere, Marcus discovered that his transformation had included more than just dragon claws. His entire body was changing, adapting to circumstances that would have killed his original human form. He struck the Korthak vessel's hull like a guided missile, his claws punching through their armor and into the ship's internal systems. Sparks flew as he tore through power conduits and navigation computers. The ship began listing immediately, no longer able to maintain position. The other two vessels opened fire on him, but Marcus was already moving. He bounded from ship to ship, disabling each one with surgical precision, not destroying them, He could have done that easily, but making sure they couldn't threaten anyone else. Within minutes, all three Korthak ships were drifting helplessly in orbit, their crews scrambling to make emergency repairs just to keep life support functioning. Marcus allowed himself to fall back toward the planetary surface, using his new abilities to control his descent. He landed softly near the ridge where the princess's ship was hidden, his transformation continuing to evolve with each passing moment. The Zephyrian escorts emerged from cover, their elegant forms trembling with what might have been fear or awe. Through their neural link, Marcus could sense their confusion and amazement. "Were you?" asked the lead escort. Marcus looked down at his transformed hands, no longer quite human, but not entirely alien either. The dragon claws were beautiful in their terrible efficiency, and he could feel vast reservoirs of power waiting to be tapped. "I'm still Marcus Chun," he replied, "but I guess I'm something more now, too." The princess herself appeared at the ship's entrance, moving slowly, but under her own power. Her injury seemed to be healing, though Marcus wasn't sure if that was due to Zephyrian physiology or something else entirely. Through their mental link, she projected gratitude so pure and intense that it almost overwhelmed him. "You saved my life. You saved the treaty between our peoples. And you paid a price that no being should have to pay." Marcus looked at his claws again, flexing them experimentally. The power flowing through them was intoxicating. He could sense that he was only beginning to understand what he'd become. "I'm not sure about the price," he admitted. "This might actually be an improvement." The princess's mental laughter was like silver bells in his mind. "The ancient powers have marked you, Marcus Chun. You carry the strength of dragons now. Use it wisely." As if in response to her words, Marcus felt new knowledge flooding his consciousness. Images of vast civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy. Technologies that could reshape worlds. Powers that could bridge the gap between species and bring peace to war-torn systems. But with the knowledge came responsibility. The entities that had transformed him expected great things. They had given him power beyond imagination, and they would hold him accountable for how he used it. Marcus looked up at the alien sky, watching the disabled Korthak ships drifting helplessly above. In the distance, he could see other vessels approaching, probably human ships responding to the distress signals that were finally getting through. Soon, there would be questions, investigations. People would want to understand what had happened to Marcus Chun and how a simple miner had become something that could disable 3 warships with his bare hands. But for now, there was just the satisfaction of a job well done and the promise of adventures to come. Marcus had saved the princess, protected the peace treaty, and discovered that sometimes losing everything was just the first step toward becoming something greater. He flexed his dragon claws one more time and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready for them. After all, he wasn't quite human anymore, and that might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The human medical facility at New Terraform Colony buzzed with activity as the most unusual patients in galactic history underwent examination. Princess Lyralii lay on a specially modified medical bed, her crystalline physiology requiring completely different monitoring equipment than anything designed for human anatomy. Meanwhile, Marcus Chun sat in another room, trying to convince a parade of doctors and scientists that he was still fundamentally human despite his rather obvious physical modifications. Dr. Sarah Winters, the colony's chief medical officer, had seen plenty of strange things during her 20 years on the frontier. Mining accidents that left people barely recognizable, radiation exposure that triggered bizarre mutations, even a few encounters with alien parasites. But nothing had prepared her for a patient whose arms had been replaced with what appeared to be living weapons of unknown origin. "The cellular structure is completely unlike anything in our databases," she explained to Marcus while reviewing his scan results. "These aren't prosthetics or grafted tissue. They're growing from your existing bone and muscle structure, but the material composition is extraordinary." Marcus flexed one claw, watching the way light seemed to bend around its surface. The transformation was still continuing, slowly but noticeably. Each day brought new capabilities, new sensations, new understanding of what he was becoming. Extraordinary how? He asked. The scales are actually a metamaterial we can't identify. They're harder than diamond, but somehow flexible. The internal structure appears to be hollow, filled with some kind of energy-conducting fluid. And the neural integration is perfect. Your brain is controlling these new appendages as naturally as if you'd been born with them. Through the facility's communication system, Marcus could hear the ongoing diplomatic crisis unfolding across the colony. The Zephyrian princess's rescue had created a sensation throughout the galaxy. 3 different species were now claiming credit for the heroic action, while the Korthak were demanding an investigation into what they described as an unprovoked attack by an unknown biological weapon. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more complicated than any of the political factions wanted to admit. Doctor, are you familiar with Earth's mythology regarding dragons? Marcus asked. Dr. Winters paused in her examination. I studied comparative mythology in college. Why? Because I think that's what I'm becoming, or what I'm being turned into. The entities that did this to me, they weren't just fixing battle damage. They were making me into something that existed long before humans ever left Earth. The doctor looked skeptical. Marcus, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but we need to focus on medical facts. Your transformation appears to be following a specific biological template, but there's no evidence of supernatural. She was interrupted by alarms throughout the medical facility. Through the reinforced windows, they could see ships descending through the planet's atmosphere. Not human vessels, and definitely not Zephyrian. These newcomers were massive, blocky, and heavily armed. Korthak battle fleet, Marcus observed calmly. They're not happy about what happened to their attack squadron. The facility's emergency communication system crackled to life. This is Admiral Zektar of the Korthak 3rd Armada. Surrender the biological weapon known as Marcus Chun, and we will spare your colony. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Dr. Winters looked at Marcus with new understanding. They're here for you. They're here because they're afraid of what I represent. Marcus corrected. The Korthak have built their entire civilization on the idea that might makes right. They've conquered dozens of worlds because no one could match their military technology. Now, they've encountered something that makes their weapons irrelevant. Through their neural link, Princess Lyraliai's voice reached Marcus's mind. The connection had grown stronger since his transformation, allowing for more detailed communication across greater distances. The Korthak fleet carries 3 battle cruisers and 18 support vessels. They are prepared to destroy this entire world rather than allow you to escape. Can your ship get you to safety? Marcus asked. Perhaps, but my escorts insist we cannot abandon the humans who helped us. On our demand, we stand with you. Marcus stood up from the examination table, his new physiology making movements smoother and more controlled than ever before. Doctor, I need you to evacuate all non-essential personnel from this facility. Things are about to get complicated. What are you planning to do? Dr. Winters demanded. What I was transformed to do, Marcus replied. Protect people who can't protect themselves. The colony's defense grid was impressive by human standards. Orbital platforms armed with plasma cannons, a squadron of atmospheric fighters, and ground-based missile systems. Against a Korthak battle fleet, they would last perhaps 15 minutes. Marcus made his way to the medical facility's roof, where he could get a clear view of the approaching enemy ships. The largest vessel was a Dreadnought-class battleship, easily 2 kilometers long and bristling with enough firepower to sterilize continents. Its escorts were smaller but still formidable, each one capable of reducing the human colony to rubble. The transformation that had begun with his arms was accelerating now, triggered by the approaching threat. Marcus felt his spine elongating, new bone and muscle tissue forming structures that had no equivalent in human anatomy. His skin was hardening into scales across his entire body, while internal organs were reshaping themselves for capabilities that defied medical science. "You feel it too," came a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of space itself. The awakening, the remembrance of what dragons truly were. Marcus recognized the presence that had transformed him after the battle. "What are you? What do you want from me?" "We are the architects, the builders of the first civilizations, the teachers of the first technologies. Long ago, we walked among the stars in forms you would recognize as dragons. When the young races began their wars, we withdrew to higher dimensions, leaving only echoes of our presence." Images flooded Marcus's mind, vast dragon-like beings working alongside primitive humanoids, teaching them to harness fire and forge metal. The architects had guided the development of dozens of species, always remaining in the background, never imposing their will directly. But evil sometimes requires direct intervention, the architect continued. The Korthak have upset the balance. They conquer without purpose, destroy without reason. They must be stopped before their aggression spreads to innocent worlds. And you chose me to stop them? We chose a being who would sacrifice himself to save others. Your transformation is not punishment or reward. It is evolution. You are becoming what the galaxy needs. The Korthak fleet had taken position in high orbit, their weapons trained on the colony below. Marcus could sense the energy patterns building in their main batteries, preparing for planetary bombardment. He spread his arms wide and discovered that they had become something magnificent and terrible. No longer just claws, but fully developed wing arms that stretched nearly 20 meters from tip to tip. The membrane between the elongated finger bones was the same metamaterial as his scales, capable of generating lift through manipulation of electromagnetic fields rather than simple aerodynamics. Marcus leaped from the medical facility's roof and found himself soaring upward with impossible speed. The planet's atmosphere became thinner around him, but his transformed physiology adapted instantly. He could breathe vacuum if necessary, draw energy directly from stellar radiation, and survive in conditions that would kill any unmodified human. The Korthak dreadnought was his first target. Admiral Zektar was reviewing final bombardment coordinates when his tactical officer reported something that made no sense. "Sir, we have a single contact rising from the planetary surface. Velocity is increasing beyond our sensor capabilities." "One of their atmospheric fighters?" the Admiral asked. "Negative, sir. The signature is organic, and it's heading directly for our position." Zektar activated his command chair's tactical display, showing a real-time image of the approaching contact. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about biology and physics. A creature that appeared to be part human, part dragon, was flying through the vacuum of space under its own power. Its wings were impossibly large, crackling with energy that bent light around them. But it was the intelligence in its eyes that truly unsettled the Admiral. This was no mindless beast, but a thinking being with purpose and determination. "All batteries, target that creature," Zektar ordered. Maximum firepower. The dreadnought's weapons opened fire with enough energy to vaporize asteroids. Particle beams, plasma bolts, and kinetic projectiles filled the space between the ship and its target. Marcus flew through the barrage as if it were a light rain. His scales absorbed the energy weapons completely, while his enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge the physical projectiles with ease. The transformation was still progressing. He could feel new organs developing that would allow even greater feats of power. He struck the dreadnought's hull with the force of a guided missile, his claws punching through armor plating that had been designed to withstand capital ship weapons. Instead of trying to destroy the vessel, Marcus began systematically disabling its critical systems. The ship's main reactor was his first target. Marcus tore through bulkheads and defensive systems until he reached the heavily shielded power core. To the Korthak engineer's amazement, he began absorbing the reactor's output directly, channeling the immense energy through his transformed physiology. "This is impossible," Admiral Zektar transmitted to his fleet. "No biological entity could survive direct contact with an antimatter reactor. But Marcus wasn't just surviving the exposure, he was thriving on it. The energy was accelerating his transformation, unlocking capabilities that had remained dormant. His consciousness expanded further, allowing him to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Through this enhanced awareness, Marcus could see the true scope of the Korthak threat. This fleet was just one small part of a massive military machine that was systematically consuming entire sectors of the galaxy. Millions of innocent beings had already died, and millions more would follow if the expansion continued. The architects had been right. This required direct intervention. Marcus emerged from the Dreadnought's hull, the ship's reactor now completely offline. Around him, the escort vessels were maneuvering to bring their weapons to bear, but their attacks were even less effective than their flagships had been. Instead of engaging them individually, Marcus decided to demonstrate the full extent of his new capabilities. He positioned himself at the center of the enemy formation and began drawing energy from the planet's magnetosphere, the solar wind, and even the quantum fluctuations of empty space itself. The power built within him until he could contain it no longer. Then, Marcus released it in a focused electromagnetic pulse that swept across the entire Korthak fleet. Every ship was instantly disabled, their weapons offline, their engines dead, their communication systems fried. The vessels began drifting helplessly in the planet's gravitational field, their crews struggling to restore even basic life support. Marcus had neutralized an entire battle fleet without killing a single enemy soldier. The achievement should have felt satisfying, but Marcus found himself troubled by the scope of his new abilities. He was becoming something beyond human comprehension, a being capable of reshaping reality through will alone. The responsibility was staggering. Through their neural link, Princess Lyraliai's thoughts reached him across the vast distance between orbit and the planetary surface. You have prevented a massacre. The Korthak would have destroyed everything on that world. But look what I had to become to stop them, Marcus replied. I'm not human anymore. I'm not sure what I am. You are what you choose to be, the princess responded. Power does not define character. How you use your abilities will determine whether you remain Marcus Chun or become something else entirely. As if to punctuate her words, distress signals began flooding the communication spectrum. Other Korthak fleets throughout the sector had detected the defeat of Admiral Zektar's forces and were converging on the system. Worse, they were no longer limiting their attacks to military targets. Civilian populations across 3 worlds were under bombardment. The message was clear: surrender Marcus Chun, or watch innocent beings die. Marcus looked down at the small blue-green world below, where humans and Zephyrians were working together to tend the wounded and analyze his transformation. It was a glimpse of what the galaxy could become. Different species cooperating instead of fighting, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. But that future would only be possible if someone was strong enough to protect it from those who preferred conquest to cooperation. Marcus spread his wings and prepared to leave the system, not in retreat, but to take the fight directly to the enemy. If the Korthak wanted a war, he would give them one, but on his terms, not theirs. The dragon claws that had replaced his human hands began glowing with inner fire as new powers awakened within him. Somewhere in the depths of space, the architects watched approvingly. Their chosen champion was finally beginning to understand his true purpose. The galaxy was about to learn why some legends never truly died. Princess Lyraliai felt Marcus's departure through their neural link, along with his grim determination to face the enemy alone. But the princess had not survived the complex politics of 3 interstellar civilizations by accepting other people's decisions without question. She gathered her escorts around her ship's command center and began planning the next phase of what was rapidly becoming the most significant conflict in galactic history. Prepare our fastest courier vessel, she ordered. Send word to the Zephyrian Council, the Andorian Federation, and any other civilized species willing to listen. Tell them that humanity has produced a champion capable of standing against the Korthak expansion. Your Highness, her lead escort asked carefully, are you certain we should involve ourselves further in this conflict? Princess Lyralii looked at the medical readings from Marcus's transformation, data that suggested powers beyond current scientific understanding. But, more importantly, she remembered the human miner who had sacrificed everything to save someone he'd never met. That being chose to protect us when he could have saved himself, she said. Honor demands that we do the same for him. And, pragmatically speaking, if Marcus Chun falls to the Korthak, no world in this galaxy will be safe. The princess began composing messages that would reshape the political landscape of known space. For the first time in centuries, the various peaceful species would need to unite against a common threat. And at the center of it all would be a former human miner who had become something that even the architects found remarkable. Marcus Chun was no longer fighting just for one colony or one peace treaty. Whether he realized it or not, he had become the focal point of a struggle that would determine the future of galactic civilization itself. The transformation was far from over. The Korthak military complex of Bastion Prime had been considered impregnable for over 2 centuries. Built into the hollow core of a dead planet, it housed the most advanced weapons development facilities in their empire. Massive shipyards churned out dreadnoughts and battle cruisers, while research laboratories worked on increasingly devastating technologies for subjugating other species. None of the facility's designers had ever considered the possibility that a single individual might assault it directly. Marcus Chun materialized from hyperspace just outside the complex's detection grid, his transformed physiology allowing him to navigate the dangerous void between stars without technological assistance. The journey from human space had taken 3 days, during which his evolution had continued at an accelerated pace. He was no longer recognizably human in appearance. His entire body was now covered in the metamaterial scales that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in higher dimensions. His wings had grown to nearly 40 meters in span, crackling with energies that could propel him faster than most starships. But perhaps most remarkably, his consciousness had expanded to encompass abilities that the architects themselves found noteworthy. Through their ongoing mental connection, Marcus could sense Princess Lyralii's concern from hundreds of light years away. She was coordinating a massive diplomatic effort to unite the peaceful species against Korthak aggression, but her thoughts frequently turned to the transformed human who had appointed himself their champion. You should not face them alone, her mental voice carried across the vast distance. The Andorian Federation has agreed to provide support. The Stellar Commonwealth is mobilizing their fleet. Even some of the neutral worlds are offering assistance. This isn't about military force, Marcus replied, his transformed mind easily maintaining the communication while analyzing the defenses ahead. The Korthak understand only strength. I need to demonstrate that their expansion has limits. And if you fall, what then becomes of the worlds you sought to protect? Marcus considered the question as he approached the massive space station. Through his enhanced senses, he could detect nearly 1 million Korthak soldiers and technicians within the facility. This wasn't just a military target. It was one of the cultural centers of their entire civilization. Then, at least I'll have bought time for others to find a better solution. The first defense satellites detected Marcus when he was still 1 million kilometers away. Automated systems began tracking his approach, but their targeting computers couldn't quite lock onto something that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Warning signals cascaded through the station's command structure as duty officers tried to categorize the unknown contact. General Vorthak, Supreme Commander of the Bastion Prime facility, studied the sensor readings with growing unease. His species had conquered 47 worlds through superior technology and ruthless tactics. They had faced every known form of resistance, planetary defense grids, mobile fleets, even desperate last stands by entire populations. But nothing in their military doctrine had prepared them for this. Analysis suggests it's the same entity that disabled Admiral Zektar's fleet, his chief intelligence officer reported. But, sir, the power readings are significantly higher than before. Whatever it is, it's grown stronger. General Vorthak activated the station's full defensive array. Particle beam stations that could vaporize asteroids swiveled to track the approaching target. Missile batteries loaded with antimatter warheads armed themselves for launch. The station's main weapon, a gravitational disruptor capable of tearing apart moons, began its power-up sequence. All defensive positions prepare for maximum firepower engagement, the general commanded. This ends here. Marcus felt the weapon systems powering up through his connection to the electromagnetic spectrum. The Korthak were preparing to hit him with enough energy to destroy small planets. Under normal circumstances, such firepower would be instantly fatal to any biological entity. But Marcus was no longer operating under normal circumstances. Instead of dodging the incoming barrage, he flew directly toward it. Particle beams that could cut through battleship armor washed over his scales harmlessly. Antimatter explosions that should have reduced him to component atoms served only to accelerate his transformation further. The gravitational disruptor, a weapon that manipulated space-time itself, actually seemed to energize him. Impossible, General Vorthak whispered as his most powerful weapons proved completely ineffective. Marcus reached the station's outer hull and began his assault on the facility itself. But rather than simply destroying everything in his path, he demonstrated a level of precision that terrified the defenders more than raw power would have. He systematically disabled every weapon system without harming the personnel operating them. He disrupted the main reactors without causing catastrophic explosions. He invaded the computer networks and shut down all external communications without damaging the life support systems. Within 30 minutes, Bastion Prime, the most heavily defended facility in Korthak space, had been completely neutralized by a single individual who had shown remarkable restraint in his use of overwhelming power. The realization that their attacker could have easily killed everyone in the station, but had chosen not to, was more demoralizing than any military defeat. Throughout the facility, Korthak soldiers began questioning everything they thought they knew about combat and conquest. Marcus found General Vorthak in the station's command center, the Korthak military leader, standing amid displays that showed the extent of his force's defeat. The general was an impressive specimen, nearly 3 meters tall, with a heavily muscled build typical of his species. But his eyes held a new understanding of his place in the galactic hierarchy. "You could have destroyed us all," General Vorthak observed, his voice carrying undertones of confusion and grudging respect. "Yes," Marcus replied simply. His voice had changed during the transformation, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the station's structural supports. "But that wouldn't accomplish anything useful." "Then what do you want?" Marcus gestured toward the displays showing Korthak military deployments across the sector. Hundreds of fleets engaged in conquest and subjugation, millions of soldiers following orders to expand an empire built on the suffering of other species. "I want you to stop," Marcus said. "Stop the expansion. Stop attacking civilian populations. Stop treating other species as resources to be harvested." General Vorthak's primary arms flexed involuntarily, a sign of barely controlled aggression among his people. "You would have us abandon everything we've built? Our entire civilization is based on strength and conquest. It's who we are." "Then become something else," Marcus suggested. "Species can evolve. Civilizations can change. The question is whether you'll do it voluntarily or have change forced upon you." To demonstrate his point, Marcus reached out with one claw and touched the station's central computer core. Through direct contact, he interfaced with a vast database that contained records of every world the Korthak had conquered, every species they had enslaved, every civilization they had destroyed. But instead of simply accessing the information, Marcus did something that should have been impossible. He began rewriting the fundamental code that governed the computer systems, not just changing data, but actually restructuring the logical frameworks that processed information. Within moments, every computer terminal in the facility was displaying something new. Images of the conquered worlds as they had existed before Korthak occupation. Records of the artistic achievements, scientific discoveries, and cultural innovations that had been lost when those civilizations fell. 47 worlds, Marcus said quietly. Billions of unique individuals whose potential was snuffed out to feed your expansion. Each one represented knowledge and beauty that can never be recovered. General Vorthak found himself looking at records he'd never seen before, documentation that the military had suppressed because it showed their conquered subjects as people rather than resources. Children creating art, scientists making discoveries, families building better lives for their offspring. All of it destroyed to expand an empire that created nothing and preserved nothing of lasting value. "What would you have us do?" the general asked, his voice subdued. "We are what we are. We cannot simply cease to exist." "You don't need to cease to exist," Marcus replied. "You need to find a better purpose. Your technology could be used to heal damaged worlds instead of destroying healthy ones. Your organizational skills could coordinate disaster relief instead of military conquests. Your strength could protect others instead of enslaving them." Through their neural link, Princess Lyraliai's thoughts reached Marcus across the vast distance. The diplomatic coalition is prepared to offer the Korthak membership in a mutual defense alliance. They could redirect their military capabilities toward protecting smaller worlds from external threats. Marcus relayed the princess's message to General Vorthak, who listened with growing amazement. The idea that the species they had spent centuries conquering would actually offer them a path to honorable coexistence was almost incomprehensible. "Why would they trust us?" the general asked. "After everything we've done?" "Because they understand something you're just beginning to learn," Marcus explained. "Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who need protection. It's about building something better than what existed before." Marcus gestured toward the disabled weapon systems around them. "I could force this change. I could destroy your fleets, dismantle your empire, and leave your people scattered across 100 worlds with no central authority. But that would just create new problems. Real change has to come from within." General Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays that showed the true cost of Korthak expansion. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "You're asking us to abandon everything that defines us as a people." "I'm asking you to become better than you are," Marcus corrected. "The strength that made you conquerors could make you protectors instead. The organization that built your empire could rebuild the worlds you damaged. The technology you use for war could be used for peace. And if we refuse..." Marcus looked around the command center, noting how easily he had neutralized the most powerful facility in Korthak space. "Then, I'll find other ways to convince you. But I'd rather we did this as allies than as enemies." The general understood the implicit threat, but, more importantly, he was beginning to understand the opportunity being offered. A chance for his people to be remembered for something other than destruction. A path forward that didn't end in eventual defeat by an enemy they couldn't match. "I cannot make this decision alone," General Vorthak admitted. "The High Command would need to approve any fundamental change to our military doctrine." "Then, call them," Marcus suggested. "Tell them what you've learned today. Show them that continuing the current path will only lead to greater losses." As if summoned by his words, emergency communication signals began flooding the station's receivers. Reports from across Korthak space described impossible victories by enemy forces that seemed to operate outside the normal laws of physics. Ships disabled by single individuals. Entire fleets rendered helpless without a single casualty inflicted. The reports were coming from other transformed humans. Marcus felt a surge of amazement and concern as he processed the information. Somehow, his transformation had triggered similar changes in other humans throughout the galaxy. Miners, engineers, scientists, even children Dozens of people who had shown exceptional courage or compassion were undergoing the same evolution he had experienced. The architects have been busy, came the familiar voice from higher dimensions. Your success demonstrated that the template was viable. We have begun implementing it more broadly. You're creating an army, Marcus realized. We are creating what the galaxy needs, beings capable of protecting the innocent without becoming corrupted by power. Humans who have proven their character through sacrifice and courage. The implications were staggering. An entire species potentially capable of reshaping galactic civilization through individual action. But with that potential came enormous responsibility and equally enormous risks. General Vorthak was studying the incoming reports with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview collapse. How many of them are there? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But enough to make conquest impossible and cooperation necessary. The general activated his command chair's communication array and began transmitting a priority signal to Korthak High Command. The message would take hours to reach the Empire's capital world, but Marcus was content to wait. Change, real change, took time. While they waited for a response, Marcus took the opportunity to study the Korthak more carefully. Through his expanded consciousness, he could perceive their true nature. Not the brutal conquerors they pretended to be, but a deeply traumatized species still reacting to some ancient catastrophe. Their homeworld had been destroyed by a natural disaster millennia ago. The survivors had rebuilt their civilization around the idea that only the strong deserved to survive, that conquest was the only protection against future catastrophe. Fear, not malice, had driven their expansion. Understanding their motivation didn't excuse their actions, but it suggested possibilities for redemption that might not otherwise exist. Tell me about your homeworld, Marcus said suddenly. General Vorthak looked surprised by the question. It's gone. Destroyed by stellar collapse 3,000 years ago. We evacuated what population we could and swore never to be helpless again. So you made sure you'd never be the victims by ensuring you were always the aggressors. It seemed logical at the time. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Fear makes people do terrible things, but it doesn't have to define them forever. The response from Korthak High Command finally arrived, and it was everything Marcus had hoped for. The Empire's leadership was prepared to discuss terms for ending their expansion and redirecting their military capabilities toward more constructive purposes. It wouldn't be easy. Centuries of military culture couldn't be changed overnight, and there would be factions within the Korthak Empire that would resist any deviation from conquest. But the process could begin. General Vorthak read the message twice before looking up at Marcus with something that might have been respect. They want to meet with you. Directly. No intermediaries. No diplomatic protocols. They want to understand what you are and what you represent. Marcus considered the invitation. Meeting with the Korthak leadership would be dangerous. They might try to capture or study him, or simply attempt to destroy what they couldn't control. But it was also an opportunity to influence an entire civilization toward a better path. Set up the meeting, Marcus decided, but make it clear that this is a negotiation, not a surrender. They'll get one chance to choose cooperation over conquest. As the general began making arrangements, Marcus felt Princess Lyraliai's thoughts across the vast distance between them. You're taking enormous risks. What if they betray your trust? Then, I'll deal with that when it happens, Marcus replied. But someone has to take the first step toward peace. Might as well be someone who's hard to kill. The princess's mental laughter carried notes of both admiration and exasperation. You're still thinking like a human. Good, Marcus responded. That's what I want to remain, regardless of what I become. Through his connection to the architects, Marcus could sense their approval of his approach. The ancient beings had chosen well when they selected humans as the template for their new champions. Other species might have been corrupted by such power, but humans seemed uniquely capable of maintaining their essential nature even while transcending their physical limitations. The meeting with Korthak High Command would determine whether that assessment was correct. If successful, It could herald a new era of galactic cooperation. If it failed, Marcus and his fellow transformed humans would need to find other ways to protect the innocent. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. The Korthak Imperial Throne World of Dominion was a monument to conquest built on the bones of 100 civilizations. Massive pyramids constructed from the metals of conquered worlds reached toward a perpetually overcast sky, while vast parade grounds displayed the spoils of 3 centuries of expansion. At the center of it all stood the Obsidian Palace, where the most powerful military empire in the galaxy conducted its affairs. Marcus Chun approached the world alone, as he had requested. The symbolism was important. A single individual meeting with the entire leadership of an interstellar empire. It demonstrated both his confidence and his commitment to peaceful resolution. The transformation that had begun weeks ago was nearly complete. Marcus had become something that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. His consciousness expanded far beyond normal human limitations. But, at his core, he remained the same person who had sacrificed everything to save a stranger. That essential humanity was what gave him hope that this meeting might succeed. Through their neural link, Princess Lyralii maintained constant communication from her position at the edge of the system with a combined fleet of Zephyrian, Andorian, and human vessels. The diplomatic coalition was prepared to intervene if necessary, but Marcus had insisted on attempting negotiation first. The Korthak Supreme Council has assembled in the throne chamber, she reported. All 7 members are present, along with their primary military advisors. They're taking this meeting seriously. Good, Marcus replied. That improves our chances of reaching an agreement. And if they attempt treachery? Marcus looked down at his transformed hands, the dragon claws crackling with energies that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Then, they'll learn why that would be inadvisable. The Obsidian Palace's landing bay was large enough to accommodate capital ships, but Marcus didn't need mechanical transportation. He folded his wings and descended through the atmosphere under his own power, landing with surprising gentleness on the polished stone platform. A delegation of Korthak guards waited to escort him to the throne chamber, their ceremonial weapons more for show than function. Through his enhanced senses, Marcus could detect the hidden security measures throughout the palace. Energy fields, automated weapons, even some kind of dimensional containment system that might pose a threat to his transformed physiology. The guards led him through corridors lined with trophies from conquered worlds. Artworks stolen from destroyed civilizations, weapons taken from defeated armies, even preserved specimens of extinct species. It was a museum of genocide, carefully maintained as a reminder of Korthak power. But Marcus also noticed something else. Maintenance robots working to repair damage that suggested recent civil unrest. Scorch marks on walls where energy weapons had been fired. Security barriers that hadn't been there in the archived images he'd studied. The Empire was not as stable as it appeared. The throne chamber itself was a vast circular room dominated by 7 towering chairs arranged in a semicircle. Each chair was carved from the core stone of a different conquered world, a deliberate symbol of the Korthak approach to governance. The Supreme Council members who occupied those chairs represented the 7 military houses that controlled the Empire. High Commander Vexthal, the nominal head of the council, was an ancient Korthak whose scarred hide told the story of 100 battles. His eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had survived centuries of political intrigue and military campaigns. So, High Commander Vexthal said as Marcus entered the chamber, "You are the creature that has been disrupting our operations." "I am Marcus Chen," Marcus replied calmly. "Former human miner, current advocate for galactic peace. And I'm here to offer your people a chance to be part of something better than endless conquest." The council members exchanged glances that conveyed volumes. Several showed barely concealed hostility, while others seemed more curious than aggressive. The political dynamics were complex, but Marcus could sense an underlying tension that suggested the Empire was already debating its future direction. You speak of peace while wielding power that makes our greatest weapons irrelevant. Observe Counselor Zaratek from the third house. How do we know this isn't simply conquest by other means? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because I'm not demanding your submission or trying to replace your government. I'm asking you to redirect your capabilities toward protection instead of conquest. There's a difference. Explain this difference, commanded High Commander Vexthal. Marcus gestured toward the trophy-lined walls around them. Everything in this room was taken from peoples who couldn't defend themselves. Your strength was used to crush the weak and claim their resources. That's conquest. He spread his wings slightly, the action causing energy patterns to ripple through the air around him. I have the power to destroy this entire world, but I'm choosing to negotiate instead. That's protection, using strength to preserve rather than consume. Counselor Mordek of the 7th House leaned forward in his stone chair. Yet your very presence here is a threat. You could kill us all before our guards could react. Yes, Marcus agreed. But I won't, because that would make me no better than you've been. Real strength doesn't require proving dominance over others. The blunt honesty seemed to surprise several council members. They were accustomed to dealing with conquered populations that either groveled for mercy or raged helplessly against their fate. Marcus was doing neither. He was treating them as equals despite having demonstrated overwhelming superiority. High Commander Vexthal activated a holographic display that showed the current state of Korthak military operations. Red indicators marked dozens of worlds where their forces had encountered transformed humans and suffered crushing defeats. The pattern was clear. Their expansion had effectively stopped. These beings like yourself, Vexthal said. How many exist? I don't know the exact number, Marcus admitted. But enough to ensure that conquest is no longer a viable strategy for any species. The galaxy has changed, and you can either adapt or be left behind. And if we refuse to adapt, ask Counselor Thetarin of the 5th House. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Then, you'll discover that there are worse fates than military defeat. A civilization that exists only to consume others will eventually consume itself. As if to illustrate his point, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. Emergency communications flooded into the throne chamber. Reports of uprising on 17 different worlds. Korthak garrison forces overwhelmed by populations that were no longer willing to accept subjugation. The transformed humans weren't just neutralizing Korthak military assets. They were inspiring resistance movements across the empire, showing conquered peoples that their oppressors could be defeated. The psychological impact was devastating to a civilization built on the myth of inevitable Korthak victory. You've triggered a rebellion across our entire empire, Counselor Zaratek observed, her voice carrying notes of both admiration and alarm. No, Marcus Corrective. I've demonstrated that rebellion is possible. The people chose to act on that knowledge themselves. High Commander Vexthal studied the tactical displays with the expression of someone watching his life's work crumble. Our forces are requesting permission to use maximum force against civilian populations. They believe that sufficient brutality will restore order. And what will you tell them? Marcus asked. The High Commander was quiet for nearly a minute before responding. That the age of Korthak expansion has ended. That we must find a new way to exist in a galaxy that no longer fears us. The admission sent shockwaves through the other council members. Several began protesting immediately, demanding that they fight rather than surrender their ancestral way of life. But Vexthal silenced them with a gesture that carried the authority of absolute command. Look at the tactical displays, he commanded. Study the reports from our military commanders. We are facing an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional means, and our traditional responses are only accelerating our losses. Counselor Mordek stood from his chair, his massive frame radiating barely controlled aggression. Then we die as Korthak have always died, in battle, fighting to the end. No, Marcus interjected. You live as Korthak have never lived, in peace, building something worthwhile instead of just taking what others have built. He gestured toward the holographic displays showing the Empire's military assets. You have the largest fleet in the galaxy, the most advanced weapons technology, and organizational skills that span dozens of star systems. Imagine what you could accomplish if you used those resources to protect instead of conquer. Through their neural link, Princess Lyraliai's voice reached Marcus across the vast distance. The Coalition fleet is detecting massive energy signatures throughout Korthak space. It appears they're powering up their planet-killer weapons. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the palace's temperature. The Korthak possessed weapons capable of destroying entire worlds, devices so horrific that even they had used them only rarely. If the hardline factions within the Empire decided to employ them against rebellious populations, the death toll could reach into the billions. Counselors, Marcus said urgently, I need you to understand something. The beings like myself aren't just strong, we're connected. If you use planet-killer weapons against civilian populations, every one of us will feel their deaths. And our response won't be measured or diplomatic. High Commander Vexthal's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. You would retaliate against our civilian populations? We would retaliate against the people who gave the orders, Marcus clarified. But the devastation would be complete. There will be no Korthak Empire left to rebuild. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. These beings understood strength, and they were beginning to comprehend that they were facing something beyond their experience or preparation. What do you want from us? Vexthal asked finally. Specifically, not abstract concepts about peace, but concrete actions. Marcus had been preparing for this question since leaving Bastion Prime. First, immediately recall all fleet elements engaged in offensive operations against civilian targets. Second, open negotiations with the diplomatic coalition for a formal ceasefire. Third, begin planning the conversion of your military infrastructure to support humanitarian and defense operations. And in return, the transformed humans will protect Korthak worlds from external threats. Your people will be given full membership in the galactic community, and will help you rebuild the worlds you've damaged over the centuries. Counselor Zaratek leaned back in her chair, clearly struggling with the concept of Korthak worlds needing protection from others. You would defend us? After everything we've done? That's what protection means, Marcus explained. You defend everyone, not just the people you like. It's what makes the difference between a guardian and a conqueror. The council members began a heated discussion in their native language, their voices rising and falling as they debated the unprecedented decision before them. Marcus listened patiently, his enhanced hearing allowing him to follow their arguments even when they switched to military codes and diplomatic ciphers. The debate revealed deep divisions within the Korthak leadership. Roughly half wanted to accept the proposed terms, recognizing that their traditional approach was no longer viable. The other half preferred to fight to extinction rather than abandon their warrior culture. High Commander Vexthal finally called for order, his voice cutting through the arguments with practiced authority. We will put it to a formal vote. All in favor of accepting the terms as presented? For hands rose, barely a majority, but enough to carry the motion. The Korthak Supreme Council accepts your proposal, Vexthal announced formally. We will issue immediate orders for all offensive operations to cease, and will open negotiations with your diplomatic coalition. Marcus felt a surge of relief, mixed with cautious optimism. The hardest part was over, but implementation would bring its own challenges. Changing a military culture that had existed for centuries wouldn't happen overnight. There's one more thing, Marcus added. The transformation that created beings like myself. It's not limited to humans. Any individual who demonstrates exceptional courage and selflessness can potentially undergo the change. Some of your own people might qualify. The implications of that statement sent new waves of discussion through the council chamber. The possibility of Korthak individuals gaining the same powers that had rendered their military obsolete opened entirely new possibilities for their species' future. As the formal negotiations began, Marcus felt Princess Lyraliai's thoughts across their neural connection. You've accomplished something remarkable. An entire empire has chosen cooperation over conquest. It's just the beginning, Marcus replied. The real work starts now, helping them find a new purpose and making sure the transformation sticks. And what about you? What happens to Marcus Chun now that you've reshaped galactic politics? Marcus considered the question as he watched Korthak diplomats beginning the complex process of negotiating with their former enemies. His transformation was complete, but his evolution as a person was still continuing. He had become something beyond human, yet somehow more human than ever before. I go wherever I'm needed, he decided. The galaxy is a big place, and there are always people who need protecting. The dragon claws suit you, the princess observed with mental laughter. Though I suspect you'll always be a minor at heart. Marcus flexed his transformed hands, watching energy patterns play across the metamaterial claws that had replaced his human arms. She was right. Despite everything that had changed, he was still fundamentally the same person who had chosen to help strangers rather than save himself. Some things are too important to let go, he agreed. As the negotiations continued around him, Marcus began planning his next move. There were other conflicts brewing in distant sectors, other populations that needed protection from forces they couldn't handle themselves. The architects had given him extraordinary power, but it was his human nature that would determine how that power was used. The transformation had begun with losing both arms while rescuing an alien princess. It was ending with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest strength came not from what you could destroy, but from what you chose to protect. Marcus Chun spread his wings and prepared to leave Dominion, but not before ensuring that the fragile peace he'd helped create would have time to take root. The galaxy was full of beings who needed guardians, and he had become something uniquely suited to that role. The dragon claws that had replaced his human hands began glowing with inner fire as new adventures called to him across the stars. Somewhere in the depths of space, the architects watched approvingly as their chosen champion prepared to face whatever challenges awaited. After all, he was still Marcus Chun, minor, protector, and now something more. And that combination was exactly what the galaxy needed. The transformation was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.